Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Beyond Net Zero webinar. I'm John Elkington, and I have the privilege of being the moderator for a very lively, I hope, panel session. And what an extraordinary time this is. In a way, we've just sort of coming through B Corp month. We are seeing a raft of different events happening this year in 2021, most obviously the G7 summit, the G20 summit, the COP15 and COP26 summits. I think we're going to be pretty much summited out by the end of this year. But it's an extraordinary opportunity to get this agenda of ours into the mainstream to an even greater extent than it is currently. In the midst of all of that, we're hearing not new language, but refreshed language coming through. And part of that is the net zero language around climate emergencies and squeezing down the carbon footprint and greenhouse gas footprints of businesses and so on. And in that context, the B Corporation movement, I think, is a quite punching disproportionately beyond its size in many ways. And so part of what we may well consider in this conversation is how do we increase the effectiveness and the impact of the communication that we are all involved in this critical year. One of the things that we're involved in is bankers for net zero. So bankers really a few years ago wouldn't have been particularly interested in all of this, but there's waking up, and one of the things the government has asked us to do is to sort of bring the bankers to the table at COP26 in Glasgow in November. So fingers crossed. I think there are lots of reasons to be positive about this year. Now, if I could bottle the spirit of the B Corporation movement globally, I would love to do that, because I think whether we got other companies of different sizes to quaff that or have it vaccinated into their arms or whatever it was, I think there is something at the heart of this movement of ours which is immensely important. And in terms of quaffing and so on, I'm going to start with Louisa of Toastdale. Louisa, I'm going to ask each of you, the four of you, just to very briefly, and I hate elevator pitches. I really loathe them. I refuse to do them myself, but I'm going to ask each of you to do one, and then very quickly link to the question, or your answer to the question of, when did you first come across the climate emergency, the climate crisis, climate change, all of that lot? And then we'll get into a proper free-flowing discussion. But Louisa, Ziane, can I start with you?
Hi, John. Thanks for having me on the panel. It's really great to be here. So yeah, I'm Louisa. I'm COO at Toastdale. We brew craft beer using surplus fresh bread from the bakery and sandwich industry that would otherwise be wasted. And all of our profits go to charities that are fixing the food system. In terms of my engagement with climate, I think I've always had nature at the heart of everything that I've done consciously in my personal life. I was working in financial services, so it's great to hear about the work you're doing with the banks at the beginning of my career, and took a break from that. I actually read an article about the work that Al Gore was doing back in 2006. And was so inspired by that I came back from my travels, started a master's in environmental science, and got a job working at the Carbon Trust, working on carbon footprinting and energy efficiency policy. And yeah, the rest is history.
Well, I hadn't realized before this that 44% of bread produced in the UK goes to, well, it's not consumed. And so there's a huge opportunity space there. Well done. And you launched, I think, in 2017, whereas Vineeta Greenwood of Wholegrain Digital launched in 2007. So it's been around for even longer, let's say. Vineeta, can you just very quickly in headlines tell us what you do, why, and then link it to the sort of climate story?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, John, and everybody else. Well, the story of Wholegrain is all revolved around Tom and me taking the time out and saying, what do we want to do with our lives that would be positive and something that we can contribute back to the society. From our engineering backgrounds, it was really hard to see that from that angle, but I was working as an electronics engineer back then, and when I was creating electronic circuits, there was built-in obsolescence in lots of products, and that bothered me as an engineer myself. And Tom was working on sustainable product design. In fact, John, he's used your triple bottom line in his thesis 20 years ago. So you've influenced us greatly. But the way Wholegrain came about was that we were seeing all these green products coming onto the market and feeling like they were not presenting themselves for the general public, but they were presenting themselves just to appeal to the hippie audience. And we wanted to bring that to more of a normal audience, that people would make green choices. So we started working on green branding for green products. And first few years we were very poor because there weren't that many green businesses that had the money, but we grew strength by strength, you know. Now we're 18 of us, so we digressed from branding into WordPress web design, because that's what our clients wanted from us going back several years ago. And we were the first agency in London to specialize in WordPress. Since then, it all tied in with our interest in climate, and we started exploring what's the footprint of the actions we're taking professionally. And we started measuring our digital carbon footprint and also our office carbon footprint, everything that we did. And so that now our specialism is to create low carbon websites which are highly performant. We've got lots of projects on, such as sustainablewebdesign.org, website carbon.com. I'm happy to give links later. So how I came about to understand climate crisis goes quite long back, probably in, oh God, it's going to show my age, but late 1980s. When
not that long ago.
Yeah, well, I was 9, and my grandmother told me that my aunt's house now has only 4 days of running water instead of 7 days a week. And we had a few droughts. I'm talking about India. I come from Bombay. And it was a shock, because we were just used to the idea of switching on the tap and having running water, not necessarily drinking water, drinking quality standards, but it was the first introduction that there can be shortage of resources that we took for granted. And I sort of started getting interested in the waste disposal and watching the piles of rubbish on the corners of the street and thinking, what are we doing? What are we doing? This is all leaching into the soil. So it was, lots of things happened that sort of got me interested.
No, thank you, Vineeta. And I'm looking at the numbers in the audience piling up, well over 100 now. And I think a number of people would have those sort of personal stories, but others probably wouldn't. And I think it's really helpful to have that sort of background. And maybe a little later on, we can get into, I know you've set the target of becoming carbon positive by the end of this, perhaps financial year, and then not having any clients or websites that are not powered by renewable energy, I think by 2026. And it'll be interesting to get to the question of, are you going to push away clients who want to use nuclear or coal, and how do you know, and how are you going to do that? But let's come back.
Yes, I will
come back to that. Alec, welcome. And Alec Mills is going to talk about, he's co-founder of Dame with Celia Poole. And would love to have your elevator pitch, if you like. And then, how did you first come across both? I know plastic waste is a big issue in your approach, but how did you come across all of that?
Well, Celia and I used to run first of all, thank you very much for having me, a humble tampon salesman on your panel. Celia and I first came across the issue of plastic waste with periods when we used to run a subscription service delivering products to women around the UK. And it was through doing that we saw the enormous amount of plastic, and then did a bit of research and realized 100 billion of these products are thrown away every year worldwide. And it's a problem that's only getting worse. Wow. And it's the 5th most common found plastic on UK beaches. So it's a huge problem, but because of the culture around periods, it's not really talked about. It's not the plastic bag of this world. So we set out to challenge, I guess, the sort of plastic waste element, but everything we try and do at Dame, we try and take a holistic approach. So we made the world's first reusable tampon applicator that only reduces plastic, but it also reduces carbon. Our reusable pads have a 40 times carbon reduction by using them, as well as each one saving 1,000 pads. And I think this is a real challenge that we face now, is how to reduce one thing without increasing carbon in another area. And I think that that approach is so important. That's what we're trying to do at Dame. In a nutshell, my elevator pitch is we're trying to provide a sustainable period product for every woman on the planet. I should have probably just said that. How did I get into this? I think I probably looked at my, going back, like looked at my grandmother with such admiration when she used to save half a raisin and put it into the fridge for, you know, for sort of, rather than throwing it away. Or she used to fold her wrapping paper and keep it for next year. And then I used to go out litter picking with my sort of grandpa and stuff. And I think from a very, very small age, that kind of post-war generation of like valuing the things that we make and keeping hold of them and repairing them was sort of instilled in me. And I think a lot of the global crisis we're in now is that we've lost that value that we put on things, and everything is disposable. And then I guess that that evolved into kind of watching Captain Planet in my sort of late 10s and looking at businesses as being a source of the evil. And I guess that focused my attention a bit more. And then for my sins, I worked in finance and saw there are these things called ethical funds. And I thought, wow, okay, well, there is a choice where people can divert their capital and people can actually do stuff about this on a macro scale. And then I ended up in a sustainable period company. So that's, I guess, my journey.
And what an extraordinary journey it is, and thank you for making it, you and your team. And at some stage we might just get into that wider social agenda of stigma and how you overcome it, because I mean you're a relatively small organization, so you have to be part of a much bigger movement moving in that direction. I just wanted to note that people are already putting lots of stuff in the chat function, and thank you very much for that. We will come on to questions from the audience a little later on, and I'm really keen to have your comments, thoughts, and questions. So Anna, that really brings us on to you, and you know, it's a lazy way of saying people don't need introduction, but this is, in this space you really don't. And I think Greenhouse you've set up in 2010, so it's quite a while ago, and things must have changed profoundly since you launched the firm. But the elevator pitch, if you would, and then how did the climate emergency first pop up on your doorstep?
Thanks, John, and also wonderful to be here and lovely to be on the panel with such inspiring people. So the elevator pitch for us really is that we did set up Greenhouse specifically to deal with climate change, and our mission is to drive and accelerate progress towards net zero goals. So this is perfect for us to be talking about it today. And I suppose I came to it a long time ago, and the thing that really inspired me was a film, which is a great thing in some ways because it was a piece of communications from Tearfund, and it was an 11-minute film that I watched, and I remember it to this day and how it completely turned around my life. I'd been working in a big corporate PR agency, selling widgets and products and doing global comms, and even flying over the world for a cup of coffee and a meeting and coming back thinking, what am I doing this? And I had children, and I kind of began to think about what my role was in life, whether I wanted to do something a bit more positive that would support the children and kind of look at what their future might be like. And at that time, I watched a film from Tearfund, and the film was about the climate change refugees that already were back then, already millions of climate change refugees. And it didn't matter what the weather was, whether it was increased flooding and rains or dry heat, they just couldn't farm their land, so they were having to move already. And I remember coming home and being with my children, with my husband, talking about it and feeling really tearful. And I hadn't really quite got to grips with the environment. I mean, I'd obviously, I was always doing recycling, all the general things, but I hadn't really touched my heart. And I think that's really interesting and significant about way people come into climate change. I think often people come in because they have seen something or they've heard something that really touches them emotionally. And that's that connection with the heart that's so important. And I think from that point on, I thought, what can I do? What have I got that I can do to help? And I had communication skills. And so we started off freelancing. I think my first client was Neil's Yard Remedies, because I was interested in what you put on children's skin, and what you put in the bloodstream makes a real difference. And obviously organic's so important. And that was the first client. And then I drew a circle of a person and I looked at the big areas, so energy, finance, food and transport. And I did a little bit of research into each area. And I found who I thought was the best in each sector. And I literally went and knocked on the door of each of those people. So Triodos Bank in finance, which is still a client today, Ecotricity in energy, Sword Association in food. And I basically said, this is who I am. This is what I can do. Can I help you? And 3 of the 4 said yes. And that was how it really started. And I think that's how we've approached it more generally as well. We see an issue, and it could be ocean mining, or it could be deforestation, and we see an issue and we go out to find the best client in that area so that we can really help scale the brilliant innovation that's already out there, so that we can really drive that and accelerate that transition. So that's how it started. And the exciting thing now is looking at today, things are really moving. Like this last year has been incredible. And when we look at what's happening now, between now and COP26, we've got such an opportunity. So it's really, really exciting looking at it now. We're now 40 people. We've grown hugely over the last year. There's so much to do, and it's a really exciting time to be in it.
Thank you. And when I think back to sort of the early days of a business like Neil's Yard Remedies, I think back to a period where companies like that were complete mutations. They were not recognizable by conventional businesses, particularly when people like Anita Roddick would stand up and call those people dinosaurs in pinstripes or whatever it was. And yet now there are swarms of mutations all around us. And I think, evolution feeds on mutations, and therefore that's a good thing, at least in my book. You've pinned your flag very clearly to the mast, Anna, by saying climate change sits at the heart of everything you do. So you've declared where it fits into your priorities. Let me go reverse order from the way I sort of got to you, and let's start with Alec, because you've got multiple priorities and you're trying to deal with the sort of stigma of period related products and so on, but you're also trying to do the climate piece. How do you balance all of this? How do you make it work?
It's a very good question. And at first we treated the 3 issues of I guess, acceptability, which is how periods are accepted in society, accessibility, like who has access to period products, and sustainability, all as 3 separate things. But the more we've done this, the more we see that they're totally intertwined. So for example, if we began by thinking pushing a sustainable agenda would be the most impactful thing that we could do, but then realize that people are not going to change their habits and reuse period products unless they are cool about handling period blood. So for us, pushing that acceptability message and how people view periods and normalizing periods is absolutely essential to people switching habits and using the reusable products. And in that way, we've kind of changed our tack a little bit. Our products are evidently sustainable because of their reusability. And so we focus more of our marketing now on pushing periods forward as a sort of on a normalizing agenda, rather than talking about the sustainable aspect, which also has the upside of people don't have to talk about sustainability. And it's an odd thing, but even in the world of periods, people don't want to buy a product because of its sustainable credentials. And like so many aspects, you're never going to buy a pair of shoes unless they look good. You're not going to buy whatever clothes it might be. And I think the same is for period products. So we find whenever we talk about the sustainability, it doesn't have as much of an impact as talking about their effectiveness or talking about periods in a very sort of positive way.
Yeah. No, and are you seeing a generational shift both in sort of women and in men in terms of their ability and comfort with talking about these sorts of issues? I would assume so, but
we are, absolutely. I mean, there used to be, the major players in our industry have effectively the world's most successful subscription companies. I mean, they have customer loyalty, a bit like bank accounts from a very young age all the way through. Yeah. And it was very hard to sort of crack that. And a part of that was because there was shame surrounding periods, and therefore people didn't talk about their products and explore different options. What we found now is that as people are prepared to talk about it more, people explore different options more, and we're breaking the back of these big monopolies, and there is now choice. And whereas before people would basically just use the period product their mother used, we find that the next generation are now shopping around and realizing that there is a choice, and ultimately, periods are all about choice and the product you use.
Thank you. And I doubt the big monopolistic companies particularly welcome their corporate backs being broken. So we'll come back to that in a way. How are the big competitors responding to all of this? And Vineeta, our small organization, which is a B Corporation, Volance, has recently been working on 2 websites. It does strike me we should have come to you. We went to Scandinavia, and questions around, climate and carbon footprint and renewables and so on just simply didn't come up in that particular supplier's interactions with our teams. We've actually just taken the project back from them. But when you're talking to potential clients, where does all of this fit in with things like, this is not going to be hackable and this is going to look lovely, and the aesthetic stuff? Where does the GHG footprint piece fit in? Do you bring it in when it's invited or asked for, or do you just really push it at people?
It depends on the knowledge that the client already has about the subject. We're seeing more and more in RFPs asking for low carbon websites, which is a massive win for us in terms of raising the issue. But a bit like what Alex said, we start off the conversation with good usability, accessibility, performance, which is what the client essentially cares about. But these all actually relate back to low carbon websites, because if the website is fast, it's because the file sizes are small, which means you have a low carbon footprint. If it's accessible, that means you'll access it quickly on a 2G, 3G network. That means your website will load quickly. That's actually, again, low carbon footprint. So although all of the internal agenda is completely focused around climate, our communications to the client revolve around what they need to hear so that they sign up for the climate friendly agenda. And some clients come in with the idea that they want a low carbon website. That's the point at which we can show them the options and have a more frank conversation. These are the options we're suggesting, not just for usability and accessibility, but also for the low carbon. And it's easier to get them on board. I think it's about education, and that's why we put so much material out for people to think about it. We genuinely don't want that to be our USP. We want to educate all of the agencies that we meet to think about that as a natural thing, like they would think about Google search algorithm or usability or navigation of the website. We want them to think about it as a base for the website discussions.
And over time, I suspect the life expectancy of a website is sort of coming down. But if you think about the life expectancy of a typical website today, and you compare the very worst of websites in terms of their carbon intensity versus perhaps towards the very best, what sort of gap are we talking about? What sort of difference?
Well, simpler the website, the longer it can live, because it's relying less on technology. And the technology is what keeps changing, because of which you need to upgrade your website. So a normal HTML, CSS website that was created 20 years ago probably still stands and looks the same. Perhaps it's not responsive, so it won't adapt to your screen size and your device, but it will work and probably will look okay. Nothing nice, but it'll look okay. So lesser the technology, the better. So that's why we strip back all of the code to as bare minimum as possible, so that people are actually served what they need, rather than all of the bells and whistles and the beauty things that add to the weight of the website. So that's how we balance our thought process when we produce a website, with the longevity as well.
And we're talking about trade-offs here, and I don't know whether there's a trade-off between simplicity of a website's architecture and software and so on, and hackability or security. Is there a trade-off there?
Not if you plan it well. Okay. The security has to be thought through right from the outset as well, and how you harden the code, how you conduct your penetration testing, how well your server is configured. Are the people who are looking after your server actually going to detect the malware and clean it up for you if there was a case of a hack? So there's a lot of factors that go into thinking about the security, and we would have thought about it from our framework point of view, rather than thinking about it as an afterthought after the website's created. But every agency has its own way and framework, so I'm not sort of saying everybody else does it this way.
No, then understood. And Louisa, I mean, I love craft beers. I've tracked that since the sort of movement since the 70s. I particularly love your beers, not only the ales, they're not only good products, but they have that wonderful story wrapped around them. But I think you indicated already in the conversation that there's a degree to which you can expose your consumers and customers to this wider story, and you have to balance that. How do you balance that? And how does this interplay between the climate agenda and everything else you're trying to do? How do they work together, or in some areas even conflict?
Yeah, so fully agree with both Alec and Vineeta, what they've talked about in terms of getting the functional aspects of the product right. As you said, the product tastes good. It's really important that people can enjoy a beer and know that they're doing good, but enjoy it enough to want to drink it again. And other elements like, the accessibility of the product, that it's stocked in places where people would typically go to buy their beer, the price, all of these sort of hygiene factors we had to get right, as well as the story that sits behind Toast. And then it's been about understanding our audience. We've got a vast range of people, from those very deep green people who are perhaps even discovering beer for the first time through Toast. They've heard the story and they've maybe bought the product as a gift or for the partner and tried it for the first time, through to people that are beer drinkers and don't really have a deep understanding of the issues that we're tackling. So we have I guess a hierarchy of messaging, and we use that through different platforms differently. But on the product itself, it's just about trying to tell the headline story, and that is that food production is the biggest impact that we as humans have on the planet, both from a climate perspective, but also from a biodiversity perspective. And that's why we exist. If we can reduce food waste, then we reduce the need for overproduction. And if that's at an industrial agricultural level, then huge amounts of natural resources being taken and pollution being caused for no reason, because we're not eating a third of the food that we produce. And I think choosing which element of the environmental story to tell to different audiences has been really important. Many people, as Alec talked about with his grandma, have grown up with this sense of waste being a a bad thing, that we shouldn't be wasting our food, we shouldn't be wasting, anything that we're producing for human use. And that's a really simple concept to grasp and to talk to people about. The next step of understanding why that has a climate impact is much more challenging, and even from a nature perspective as well, talking about biodiversity. So we have actually just launched a new range of beers called Rise Up, where we're collaborating with a whole suite of different B Corp businesses to help us to explain what we mean by a broken food system. And so each of these beers talks about deforestation as a specific topic. It talks about ocean overfishing, plastic pollution, etc. It talks about how the way that we farm intensively with chemicals is leaching into the soil systems, but it also then ends up in our rivers and coastal ecosystems. We're also going to be talking about the human element. So the final beer in the series is about food justice, in terms of both the workers in the supply chain and the fact that we have a food system that is not feeding millions of people adequately around the world. So this is our way of trying to communicate a very complex story in a fun and engaging way to get people to start interacting with the conversation.
Thank you, Louisa. And one quick question is, language changes in any area of business or any social movement or whatever, and it changes constantly. And one of the terms that's being sort of resurrected at the moment is regeneration or regenerative. And the area where I think we probably see most of that surfacing is in agriculture, farming, food, that sort of area. Do you think regenerative is a useful label?
I think probably most people don't understand what it means. There's a lot of work that we need to do to communicate what it means to be regenerative, which is essentially to not be overtaking and over polluting the earth, and to be working in harmony with nature. It's also very difficult for businesses to move, I think, on that regenerative journey to regenerative agriculture and then ultimately organic, just because there hasn't really been the demand so far. So, for example, we have been looking at how we use more organic ingredients in our beer, and for lots of the Rise Up beers we've been able to do that. But we've had challenges with accessing those ingredients. There just aren't that many suppliers that are able to provide with the price of those and with the quality of the ingredients that we're able to get as well. So it's something that we can't just look to agriculture, to the farmers to resolve it. It must be, as with everything, an integrated approach. We want to work with our supply chain to see if we as a business can help our audience to understand why it's important, and therefore support the supply chain to move in that direction.
Thank you. And I want to come next to a loop round to Anna again, but it's fascinating, and you've answered one niggling question in my mind, which was, what is the collective noun for a collection of ale producers? And you use sweet, which weirdly I put down for the products, but I didn't know what and I'm sure that's not the technical term either. But Anna, let me come to you. And you've been listening to these three, and you as you said earlier on, you support a range of different entrepreneurial and innovative people in different sectors. And the question I want to ask you is about, we've just touched on the issue of scale and scaling. It's very easy to be completely besotted by individual social enterprises and so on, and think that they, join them in the belief that they will change the world. And hopefully some of them will do that. But at the same time, we've got to change the system that provides the context for everything that we do. And that requires a different level of engagement with the system, with politics and so on. How do you see the balance currently between glorifying and championing sort of individual change agents and addressing that much bigger systemic level of all of this, which with climate change is make or break. If we don't do that, it doesn't really matter what happens at other levels. So how are you seeing that?
I think it's a real balance. It's a really interesting conundrum to talk about, because we have such a big opportunity on the global stage now. And things like net zero, while we might feel frustrated that it doesn't resonate with consumers, it's really resonating globally with governments, with businesses. And you see more and more businesses signing up and making huge financial commitments and huge ambitious commitments on carbon. So you need that kind of umbrella movement to really drive that forward. And I think the work that people like Nigel Topping are doing on Race to Zero is really important. But we also need consumers who are outraged about what's going on, and also outraged and fighting for further action and more direct action from governments. So there's a whole, as Louisa was saying, the audiences are very different, but you need those consumers to feel motivated to understand what they can do and the power that they've got to drive change within governments. And that also comes with investors, with businesses, and with governments. So it's a real balance. I think the bigger opportunity at the moment is the incredible momentum behind what's going to happen at COP. And that's what we're really excited about. And there are whole movements for change around that. And coalitions of businesses, coalitions of NGOs coming together and working together and collaborating really closely on that, getting the messaging right, making sure that we hold people to account is essential. And I think that's an area where we're putting a lot of focus at the moment. The idea of storytelling and being really inspiring around different stories is incredibly important too, because consumers can feel overwhelmed, as you know. There's so much going on and there's so many negative stories around climate change that it can feel completely overwhelming and people don't know where to turn and what to do. And I read a really interesting article recently that talked about imagination and helping people in the street or consumers and communities to actually imagine what a better world could look like. And I think that's really interesting, because if you can't imagine it, then you can't design around it, and you can't create it, and you can't build it, and then you can't scale it. So that idea of finding really brilliant, amazing, inspirational stories of people doing innovative things that you couldn't even imagine. Like, I think I read one article of a company called Weather Matters who are reforesting the Sinai Desert. I mean, who would have thought that's even possible? So it's finding those exponential, as you used to like to call it, the breakthrough kind of ideas that if we were to support them, and if we put the right kind of people in place and the right investors in place, we could scale it and it could become really exciting. Makes a big, big difference. You need to feel hope, and you need to feel that there are stories out there that are going to inspire people. And that comes absolutely right down to the fantastic news on Toast Ale and on Dame products, which is like products in the home where you can just choose automatically, that tell a story for you, that help you in your life, as well as being really good for the climate. It comes right down to those as well. So I think there's a different scale, but I think those inspirational stories and the way we tell them and the way we bring along people with us and we endorse them through other people who people listen to in their lives is really important. And then I think there's one other bit that's really exciting, which is this whole notion of the climate assembly and engaging people in the discussion, so that when we go to politicians, we can show that actually consumers really support this. They really want action and they want it now, that businesses are behind it. But if we don't involve those people in the assemblies or in the kind of discussion and in the communities, then we're not going to get the change we see, because they're not going to be part of that discussion. I think it's incredibly important that they're part of that change.
Thank you, Anna. And I'd just like to, as a final question before opening it up to Q&A, and hopefully Vineeta will have some good questions. And I've been just tracking the chat as these questions and comments are coming through. And I mean, people from Brazil, people from all over the United States, people from Spain, all around the world. So thanks very much for the inputs that you're contributing. The question is this. Anna's just talked about the importance of communication in all of this. And my sense is that as the advantage starts to move towards a sort of B Corp sort of world, we're going to see quite intensive pushback from some of the incumbent industries. I mean, I referenced that with the period products markets, but it may well be that you're already seeing elements of that. So any thoughts on competitive pushback would be welcome. But there's another rather different question, which is about young people. And if I think about younger people, then alcohol is possibly a problem product. Websites, they're probably not yet in that market, and period products, again, not particularly. So how do you see young people's role in all of this? To what extent are you engaging younger folk, and how are you doing that, both in terms of communication and the sort of outcomes you're looking for? And I'm not going to direct this to any one person. I mean, anyone got anything they'd like to say on that one?
I'll mention on the competitive pushback. I'd say that we've actually seen the opposite, which has been really fantastic. When we set up Toast, our mission was to change the whole industry, to create a more circular brewing industry, knowing that the four of us as a team were not going to be able to change the world alone, that these issues are much too big for us, and we have now done, I think, about 55 collaborations all around the world over the past 5 years with different breweries of all different sizes, but they've been kind of one-off collaborations, and we've been pushing and pushing and pushing, and then this year we've started to see really interesting changes in the industry. I think, John, you and I have talked in the past about some of the supermarkets getting behind the concept, and working with a brewery so that they have their own branded bread beer in store. So just last year, Morrison's followed M&S and Iceland, who'd done that previously. So that's really fantastic, because it's their supply chain. It's the sandwich manufacturers that are making packaged sandwiches for those supermarkets that end up with fresh bread surplus because people don't eat the crusts. So shortening that supply chain and getting a product into the market for them is fantastic. And then this year we've been working with Brewdog and advising them over a period of about 3 months to look at how they can incorporate bread into their beers, which they have now done. They've launched Lost Lager, which they're using a percentage of bread in there. And yeah, I'm seeing a lot more noise around the whole industry, I guess, talking more about sustainability. Some of those big brewers have been working on it in the past anyway, looking at packaging as well as the beer itself, but having the confidence now to talk more to the public about the initiatives that they're taking, because I think everybody's seeing that consumers are interested, and it's seen as a bit of a USP.
Thank you, Louisa. That's a very encouraging story. I'm getting quite a lot of feedback. I don't know where that's coming from, but that's dealt with. Alec, just before I come on to the questions, and the first question I'm going to address, which has come in through the chat function, is how do you define net zero, and how do you think about and respond to the greenwashing that we're starting to come up in that space? And Vineeta, I'll start with you in a moment, but before that, Alec, have you seen pushback from incumbents, bigger competitors, or have you seen the same trend that Louisa was talking about, which that they're embracing you with open arms? I sort of doubt that, but
a bit of both, to be honest. I guess, like, on that net thing, like the word net doesn't really excite anyone. I mean, if I told my wife on our anniversary I sort of net liked her or net loved her, I think it would be I'd get a slap in the face. I think businesses like B Corps need to inspire and lead from the front and show what's possible. And I think small challenger brands have the nifty sort of scouting ability that these giant tankers of businesses don't have. And we have been inspired, Dame, massively by other companies, whether it be Patagonia or Body Shop. These companies have been around for a while, and I think those companies do more through their actions in inspiring other businesses than I think they could possibly do through any of their products. And I think that's the most powerful driver for change. The first thing that we did at Dame was to go beyond net zero and not only reduce the carbon of our individual products, but to offset all our existing carbon twice. And I think stories like upcycled materials, regenerative farming, shortened supply chains, cool partnerships. They're all really, really exciting things that you can communicate the issue with. And yes, we have seen the larger players start to copy us. And we get calls from them quite regularly saying, you know, can we license your applicator? Or we've actually seen a major competitor produce their own organic tampons. But a large part of the problem is unless they do it properly with a complete supply chain or carbon analysis from front to end, they can actually add to the problem.
Yeah.
And we saw that, you know, we make organic cotton tampons, and a competitor has now launched tampons that say organic cotton in massive writing on the front, but then you look small and it says organic cotton core. And what they've done is single-handedly taken a whole lot of good-meaning consumers and put them onto a product which they think is the better solution. And actually, that's going to be even harder to reverse because people think they're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
So, yes, I think we can change the big players, but the big players have to do things with authenticity and transparency, because otherwise they're actually adding to the problem.
Thanks, Alec. That's begun to answer one of the other questions, which is how can big companies move beyond net zero? But Vineeta, let me just come to you and say, do you use net zero as branding or language, and how do you use it? Or what else?
No, we don't use net zero as a concept when we are communicating about ourselves, because net zero is very difficult to define. Although there is a definition in the UK government website, I don't think many people have read it and understood it. Therefore, the way we look at it as the amount of carbon that we're producing, firstly, we're trying to reduce that. And then whatever is left to compensate, we are using regenerative, rewilding, nature-based projects to draw down, rather than use the word offset, which can be quite misleading in a way, that you can cheat here and then sort of pay somebody else to offset your cheating. That's what offset feels like. So we're trying to invest in regenerative and rewilding projects, whatever is available at the moment, but I'm sure the opportunities will increase. Yeah.
Well, that's very clear, and thank you for it. And one of the things that's just come through from Brian in the United States is that in terms of beer production, the local production of you know, bread-based ales and so on could be very neatly slotted into the circular economy space. Are you all finding that different movements with different brandings are sort of trying to claim you as their own? It might be circular, it might be inclusive, it might be whatever it might be, or is that not an issue? Just the very fact that you're part of the B Corp movement is enough. Louisa, what's your experience?
I mean, we've always been very transparent and tried to encourage others to join us in what we're doing. We publish a recipe online so that, you know, even home brewers can use the.
That's brilliant.
I quite often see, because we follow the news about new breweries that have been using bread, we track it as part of our impact analysis from an internal perspective. Quite often people give credit to Toast as the inspiration behind why they're doing what they're doing, which, you know, is what we wanted to achieve, so it's fantastic. Occasionally not, which is then a little bit frustrating, but like Alec said, it's getting companies to do it in a very authentic, genuine way that will have an impact. You know, if a company is using 5% of their grain bill as bread, we use about 30%, and we're looking to try to increase that. It is just a nod to the change that we're trying to achieve, and potentially misleading to consumers. But it's still an improvement. So it just depends how they are positioning the work that they're doing. We want to see everyone change, but in a very authentic way.
Well, I'm going to thank you. I'm going to switch the questions. Sunita is very busily pumping through questions that people are putting in. So Sunita, thanks very much for that. And one of them has been this question around what has been the easiest win for each of you on your journey towards net zero. And perhaps I'll start, Alec, with you, and then anyone else who's minded to pick that one up. I'd be interested in your answers.
The easiest win, I think, comes from doing the boring bit of doing a full scope analysis, and learning from that. It's a bore. It's more of a bore than becoming a B Corp in that entire process, but it's an essential one. And for us, doing that while we were designing the product quickly showed that actually the making of our reusable pad wasn't the issue, nor was the transportation. It was the actual washing of the pad that caused the most carbon footprint. So by doing that analysis, as we were in the design process, we were able to think about the washing solution, and we provide a dry bag where people can soak their pad before washing it. And what this does is give our customers confidence that they can put their pad in with a wash with all their other clothes and not wash them on their own. And that one bit of product design, which is using the dry bag, is basically single-handedly responsible for reducing our carbon by 40 times. If we didn't have that, it would actually have increased our carbon by 3 times. So yeah, that for us was a really easy win.
Well, that's an astounding answer. I'm going to ask Anna next, but I'm going to flip the question. Instead of saying what was the easiest thing you did on the journey towards net zero, what was one of the most challenging things, and why did you fail at it, stick with it, succeed at it, whatever? You're muted.
I'm going to do both because I've got a really quick and easy win for people.
Okay, good.
I feel really, really strongly about is I think that everybody should switch to renewable energy as a provider. So when you look at your carbon footprint, you do scope 1 and 2. Energy is a huge part of people's carbon footprint. Some people come back and say, well, I've got a landlord and they've got multiple tenants, but let's campaign to get every landlord into renewable energy. And if you've got your own office, there's no reason why you shouldn't be on renewable energy, and it will lower your carbon footprint significantly. So that's my top tip. Secondly, the most challenging is we really want to be regenerative as a business. And the challenging thing, I think, is looking at how you regard offsets, because it's so complex. And we want to rewild, we want to look at the soil, we want to make sure that we're doing things that add something back into the environment. And so actually what we're considering, or what we're doing, in fact, I'm signing the thing today, is we're going to set up a holding company where 50% of our profits go into the holding company. And then that invests into regenerative agriculture, but it also invests into small scale, interesting new technologies that are going to scale on climate change. And also 10% will go to NGOs. So the idea being, how can we use what we've got and some of our profits to go back into making a bigger difference? And likewise, also with scope 1 and 2, it's easy-ish for us because we sell time, not products. But also, how can we use our influence as communicators within the PR industry? Because you've got all those communicators out there selling more and more products. And actually, we need the very best communicators on climate change. So how can we attract more people in to understand that sustainability is critical and that their skills are worthwhile and that they can make a decent living through it by doing something responsible and actually putting their time and energy into that. So anyway, a bit longer, but those are the things that excite me and that we're working on at the moment.
No, it's very helpful, and you know, Volance is based in Somerset House, and we have exactly the problem that you identified, which is there is a sort of group holding that manages the whole property, and getting them to shift has been complicated, but we should all push forward with that. Vineeta, with the customers and partners and so on that you're providing website services for, and given that you're sort of skewing your selection process to people who should be interested, probably are interested in all of this, what sort of trends do you see in terms of people's openness to these sort of considerations and to the sort of service that you offer? I would hope that the market was opening out all the time, but I don't know that.
People are positive when they hear good things they're doing as a side product of the things that they expected to happen.
Yeah.
So going back to the same answer, it feels like a recycling of my answer, but if you don't have a product or a service that actually serves the purpose that they came to you with, if that's really the crux of the matter for them. But as soon as you start talking about the environment, I think a happy light bulb goes off, which they also want to, get engaged in, and it helps with their CSR and conversations with their partners as well. So even the clients who are not necessarily interested in the environment and talk about it as much are generally engaged through our newsletters and come back to me and ask, oh, so I saw in my newsletter my website's producing X amount of carbon, what are you going to do about it? It's like, great, finally we got your attention. When I was talking about it earlier, it wasn't as visible or audible because it wasn't on the agenda. So sometimes you have to have the same information come through from different angles to that person to influence. But we have ethically aligned clients, so they do care about more of the social and environmental good.
I'm starting to have palpitations in the sense that we're right up against time. The next question I would have asked, because it's come through in the chat, and I think it's a very good one, was around labeling and how in each of your different sectors in relation to your different products, what sort of role labeling plays. That's a huge subject. Does anyone have anything very sharp and concise to say on labeling? And then I'm going to hand it back to Anna just to sort of thank people and tie the knot. Any thoughts?
I wish
Alec.
that carbon labeling had the same approach that nutrition does on food packets. If you could very quickly just see the wider impact of your product, it would not only make companies think about their footprint and their entire process, it also give consumers another benchmark from which to sort of measure things. So yeah, I think labeling could be a hell of a lot clearer, and I think bringing carbon into labeling could be very beneficial.
Thank you. Louisa, final word.
So I was just going to say, and this is very big aspirational of me, but what I would really love to see is that companies had to disclose whether they were negative rather than disclosing that you are non-regenerative and not organic, rather than relying on a label to say that you are, so that people can see the negative side of a brand.
I suspected that was going to be a big space to sort of occupy, but thank you all. And thank you, firstly, thank you all for being part of the panel discussion, but thank you more broadly for everything that you're doing in your different sectors and areas of activity. It gives me great hope that there are people out there doing what you're doing. And Anna, same to you, but back to you just to conclude, if you will.
Yeah, I just wanted to say what a fantastic discussion. I love the idea of everybody having to put on their website what their carbon footprint is and being incredibly transparent and accountable. Thank you very much to John Elkington, inspired as always and enlightened, and we've been following you for years. So it's lovely to have you as our host. Thank you to Louisa and to Alex and Vineeta, fantastic stories. Loving that you can tell the whole mission and your story through your products and what you're doing. And just to say that we've had so much interest, we really want to carry on the series, and we really want to continue to interview people about what they're doing, find out more, share stories, so that really we can move forward on this together and collaboratively. So thank you to the Greenhouse team that organised it, and off to the next. There's a fantastic B Corp event now, which is launching. It's the Business Pledge. It's the
Better Business Act.
Better Business Act, thank you very much. Better Business Act to fight for better businesses in the UK. So I think many of us are going off to join that. So thank you.
Fabulous.
I look forward to seeing you at the next one.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye.